So welcome to part two of London 2017. And as you can see from the photo on the front, we did make it to Stonehenge. However, before going, we decided it was time to take it a little easy for an evening in Bath. I was starting to get a little sick, so we went to the Thermal Spa Bath complex and actually got to swim on a rooftop. Though you're not allowed to take pictures, obviously, so I can't show you that. I can, however, show you that we had a really nice B&B that we were staying in, little change of pace, and this is the full English breakfast they brought out in the morning. After that, it was off on the road, so we had arranged with Hertz to rent a car, and there was a little mishap, so we ended up with an SUV, which was pretty exciting because we were going down some pretty small English roads. But what you see below is a traffic jam on the M4 and me driving on the other side of the road. Don't worry, I'm fully in park mode when I took this picture. It's interesting to drive on the other side of the road. I've only done it once before, but as Sarah put it, I think when we were in Australia driving for 3 weeks, we grew another part of the brain, and it was kind of nice to slip back in and find out that that part still works. Our first stop was Avebury, which is a beautiful little town set in the middle of a Neolithic henge. Now, these are much smaller than Stonehenge in terms of the size of the rocks, but by no means are they uh, in any way small. But the henge itself is absolutely amazingly large. And so, one of the things that you can see when you go to a monument in person, you can see this in the bottom, is though you see the rocks in pictures, you often don't see really good photographs of the earthworks portion of the monument where portions would be raised, or in this case, a ditch was dug that really made this hinged circle look different than the natural surroundings. From there, since we had a car, we were able to drive out to West Kennet Long Barrow, which is up at the top. That's a Neolithic barrow. You can see the large stones in the front right here, and then a long earthen portion of the monument. The caves only go into about here, so this is likely some sort of a ramp for sliding things up, and then that sets up a long tradition of creating long barrows. And below that is Silbury Hill, which is a completely man-made earthen monument, and you can see how different it looks from the surrounding environment. Stonehenge was every bit as spectacular as one would expect, and because we were there on a partially rainy day, it mostly, thank goodness, seemed to rain while I was driving, and not while we were seeing sights. But because it was, off season and a mainly rainless day, we were there with only a few thousand of our closest friends. But as you can see, many of them are actually down in the museum below, and then you shuttle up to the site itself. The top photograph is Stonehenge in solstice alignment, and that's the slaughter stone down in the lower left of that photograph. Of course, it used to be a standing stone, but in Victorian times, people thought that Neolithic people had sacrificed humans out here, so that's what they assigned it as a meaning. And again, on the bottom, you can see the earthworks portion of the monument. You can really see that in real life as you circumnavigate this monument far more easily than you can in photographs. In the very far distance, up against those trees, and a couple right out here in the fields, there were barrows around this. And one thing that people don't talk about with Stonehenge very much is it's as much a funerary monument as anything else for hundreds, and then it adds up to eventually thousands of years. There were burials at this site. And so that's a very significant portion of the monument that, again, you see well when you're there, but is really hard to find in photographs. We ended that day driving down to Salisbury, and it was a fantastic chance to see Salisbury Cathedral, which is an amazing example of English Gothic architecture. You can see the cloister to the right, the front facade with those beautiful giant windows, and of course, when you're inside, you can see things like this amazing vaulted ceiling. Then that night it was back to London, and the next morning off to the outskirts of London to see Hampton Court Palace. This is an older palace that got a Baroque facelift by Christopher Wren. I really wanted to check it out for a couple of reasons, but I'm going to start with the exterior reasons. Here is an exterior facade with those beautiful symmetrical Baroque gardens in the front. Here's an interior courtyard. Really gives you a look at how gorgeous this place is. And then this is the Montaigne room. So one of the things that I wanted to check out here is that Charles I had done a lot to bring Italian and Dutch art to England. And so this is a set of Montaigne paintings that he purchased for £15,000 in 1628. So it's, a while after they were actually created. And you can see that already there's a huge value on this Renaissance master's work. Um, Charles I also bought a number of Raphael tapestries and created a room for I should say he bought the Raphael tapestry cartoons, so full-size paintings that were made into tapestries, and he had a room for those as well in the palace. Um, and then you'll see a ceiling that he commissioned just a little later. We decided to take a ferry along the Thames back to get a different look at London because we were so far out. And as you can see on the top, it's pretty interesting. You can see an older style of home. Uh, you can even see a little bit of a Thames island on the far left, where you have individual houses and, like lawns right there on the Thames River. Below, we're a little closer into town, and all along the way, we'd seen all sorts of amazing uh, school setups for kids learning to row. So you can see that going on right in front of Craven Cottage, which is where Fulham Football Club play. Sarah and I had tried to get tickets to the Fulham playoff game or the Tottenham game, and there's a whole different system when you go to England for buying tickets, and you have loyalty points and have to have a history. So, needless to say, we stuck with art and watched one of them on television. On the way coming into town, you could really see that since the last time we'd been, there was a lot of new building up and along the Thames. These are fairly postmodern looking buildings that are meant to look like naval vessels in their architecture. And that was a new thing. And you could see as well, right alongside that, the older tradition of building in England. This is the Palace at Westminster, where the House of Commons and the House of Lords meet, and you get an entirely different view coming in on whether, depending on your perspective, the front or the back side of this amazing structure, and that's Big Ben off in the furthest tower in the distance there. When we got out, we were right there in Westminster, and it was going to rain the next day, which is when we had our tickets. But we were able to get a couple of photographs of the outside of Westminster Abbey, which is a fantastic example of English Gothic. And if you're a history buff, a great place to go and learn more about the lives of the various monarchs, right alongside their funerary monuments. On the right is a little shot of the cloister. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to take any photographs inside the abbey itself, and much of the cloistering was under renovation, so that's all I get to show you this time around. Our last big architectural site the next day was the Banqueting House. This has the only, to my knowledge, remaining Rubens ceiling that's still in situ. This was bought by Charles I, or I should say it was commissioned by Charles I and paid for by Charles I, and it is the building in front of which he was beheaded. To the right, you can see that for looking at this ceiling, which is a great piece of propaganda on the role of the monarch in society, that in order to facilitate people really being able to get a good look, that they've laid out beanbag chairs, and it really did make it easier to have your head not craning up, but to be able to lay back and really enjoy the paintings themselves. On the way to our last really big site, which is the National Gallery, we stopped by St. Martin's in the Fields Cafe in the Crypt, and yes, you can get a really fantastic meal right in an actual church crypt where you can see the two monuments below you as you eat. It's a really intriguing experience. The National Gallery has amazing treasures, including the Arnolfini portrait. And instead of taking that, which has glass in front of it, I just thought I would put this beautiful little self-portrait of Van Eyck up to give you an idea of how amazing that collection is. I promised a picture also of the Claude Lorrain on the left and the Turner on the right that were required by Turner's will if he was going to give a lot of pieces to Great Britain. Um, One thing that's really pretty special about London is that the majority of the museums are 100% free to the world, which means that the world comes and sees them. So we're here pretty off season, and as you can see with the Da Vinci to the left, there are a lot of people, and you end up waiting to get really good looks at these pieces. On the right, you can see that there's often large groups. And one thing that I thought that was pretty amazing is a lot of school kids came through since we were on weekdays, and I just can't imagine what it would be like to be able to go see something like that giant Stubbs horse or this Da Vinci as part of your school education. So I thought I would end this segment with returning to cuisine and a recommendation, which is to take the recommendations of the people that you've talked to who've been to the places you're going to visit. And so, from talking to a number of people, we knew that Czech style and German style Pilsners were kind of the rage in Britain right now. And of course, especially with British and English food, uh, enjoying beer with is a big part of that experience. And while we enjoyed in moderation, we did enjoy. So on the left-hand side, you can see two beers that are from the company that Budweiser stole the name from. These are Budvar Czech style Pilsner on the left, and then a dark to the right. And by the way, the dark is really amazing. And my friend Mike Sundquist, who's the dean of the division, he had recommended to us Duscher's IPA. And at first, I really kind of thought that he was recommending it because it sounded like Dukeshire, and that it was a little bit of a gimmick recommendation. But he kept saying, "No, try it," and we found it on the last night. Absolutely fantastic. It's got the body of a German Pils, but then the flavor of a really light and beautiful IPA. Mike had also recommended a chain called Wagamama's, and he probably knew that Sarah and I are really interested in different types of hybrid food, and this is a Japanese style ramen chain, but with a very English hybrid twist. So there was a lot more in the way of pork than I would expect in Japanese food, and some really interesting additions that were sort of pan-Asian. And we'd had the chance to enjoy on a Renwalk day, which is where the actual food picture's from. But because we had taken him up on this recommendation and we were sort of stuck at the airport on the last day waiting for a little while, we knew when we saw Wagamama's that we had a place that we could go and hang out for a couple of hours and get a really good meal at. So I hope you enjoyed the London 2017 version, and I hope that maybe this will help you plan your trip in the future.